He won't eat. The voice came through the wall at 3 in the morning. Low, urgent, not quite steady. Alara Voss heard it from the nurse's station and was already standing before she knew why. She stepped into the corridor. The light was the color of old bone, fluorescent and flat, pressing down on the length of Ward 6 from above. A man sat just outside room 12, with his forearms on his knees and his head lowered. He was still in the clothes he'd been discharged in, dark green shirt, canvas trousers, boots that had seen serious ground. She recognized him. She recognized the dog. The dog was a Belgian Malinois, lean and alert, sitting pressed against the man's left leg. His ears were forward. His dark eyes moved between the man and the corridor, with the calm authority of something that understood its job completely. Nobody could explain why the dog was there. Visiting hours had ended at 8. The facility's policy on animals was unambiguous, and yet every night that week, when Alara had come in for the 12-hour shift, the dog had been there, quiet, unobtrusive, inexplicably present in a ward where he had no paperwork and no clearance. The other nurses had asked. The charge nurse had asked. No one had an answer that made sense. What nobody there knew was that the answer was already on file. It was 17 pages long and stamped with a designation most of them had never read, and 2 of them would not have believed. Stories like this happen in places where attention is in short supply. This one is for everyone who has sat in a corridor at 3 in the morning and decided it was easier to stay than to go. We started this channel because those people don't usually get a story told about them. If you're new here, welcome. Subscribe if you want more. And when you're done listening, we'd love to know, has an animal ever recognized something in you that a person overlooked? Tell us in the comments. We read every single one. Alara had been a nurse for 11 years. She had worked pediatric, cardiac, surgical, and finally landed in the Veteran Rehabilitation Unit at Cresthaven Regional, which was not glamorous and was frequently thankless and suited her completely. She was 34 years old, with dark brown hair she kept pinned at the back of her neck in a bun that never quite stayed neat by the end of a shift. Her eyes were a pale, serious gray that people sometimes read as skepticism and sometimes as calm, depending on how they felt about being looked at carefully. She wore dark navy scrubs and a watch on her left wrist, old and round-faced with a second hand that swept in one continuous motion rather than ticking. She had worn it since nursing school. She had never explained to anyone why she kept it. She was the first to arrive at the start of a shift and the last to sign out. She remembered details. She remembered which patients took their medication with juice instead of water, who needed an extra blanket by 2 in the morning, whose family visited and whose didn't. She didn't write these things in charts because some of them weren't the kind of thing charts recorded. She just knew. The man in the corridor was named Soren Wick. He had been a patient at Cresthaven for 3 weeks, referred from the military hospital 40 minutes south for what the transfer documents described as a prolonged recovery following a service-related injury. The injury was to his right shoulder and arm. His range of motion was limited. His pain management protocol was straightforward. On paper, he was uncomplicated. In the ward, he was quiet. He never asked for anything the nurses didn't offer first. He said thank you, in a way that sounded practiced, like a habit built over years of meaning it. His meals came back mostly finished. He did his physical therapy without complaint, and did extra repetitions when the therapist had her back turned, which Alara had noticed twice and said nothing about, because she recognized the impulse to do more than you're asked, and she didn't want to make him feel watched. The dog was named Cato. Alara learned this the second evening, when she had crouched down in the corridor and held her hand out flat and waited. The dog had looked at her for a long time before he leaned forward and touched his nose to her palm, just once. Then he sat back. His name's Cato, Soren had said from the doorway. I figured he'd introduce himself when he was ready, Alara said. Soren looked at her for a moment. He usually takes longer. She didn't ask why the dog was there. She had her own way of waiting for the right question. Her colleague on nights, Priya Ball, had fewer reservations. Priya was 5 years younger and thought patience was something you used when you had no other option. You know he doesn't have clearance, Priya said at the station that second night, not unkindly, watching Alara document without looking up. I know, Alara said. So what are we doing? Alara set down her pen. We're doing our jobs. Priya gave her a look that meant she was unconvinced, but not going to argue. Then she pulled a granola bar from her bag and went back to her charting. That was as close to a complaint as either of them came, for the first 6 nights. Dr. Harlan Vetch arrived on the 7th day. He was the director of the rehabilitation program, and he came through Ward 6 at the wrong time of the morning for anyone who didn't have an agenda. Alara was updating a medication log at the station when he appeared at the end of the corridor, moving with the particular energy of someone who had made a decision before leaving his office. He was a trim man in his late 50s, with silver hair kept close to the head, and he held his clipboard the way some people hold a verdict. He stopped at the nurse's station. I need to discuss patient Wick, he said. Of course, Alara said. He's been listed for a standard-length stay. I'm recommending he be moved to the outpatient protocol. He set a single page on the counter. Effective the end of next week. She looked at the page. His shoulder assessment is still pending. The initial imaging is sufficient. He tapped the paper once. Outpatient is appropriate. She didn't argue. Not then. She filed the page in the correct folder and said nothing more until he was gone. Then she sat very still for a moment. He hasn't even asked about the dog, Priya said quietly, from her side of the station. No, Alara said. He hasn't. What Alara didn't say, and what she had been thinking about for 3 days, was this. She had been trying to request Cato's transfer paperwork since the end of Soren's first week. She had made 3 separate inquiries, each routed to a different administrative contact. All 3 had come back with polite variations on the same answer. The transfer paperwork for Cato, military working dog, handler designation Wick, S, was pending review and could not be located in the current filing system. The records, she had been told twice, were not accessible to civilian medical facilities. On the 3rd attempt, she had been told the records didn't exist. She had written that down, word for word, and kept the note. She went to Soren's room the evening after Vetch's visit, during the quiet half-hour between the dinner check and the overnight medication round. She knocked. He was sitting in the chair by the window, and the last of the daylight, coming in low and amber from the west, fell across his left side, and the dog pressed against his knee. Can I come in? She asked. Yeah, he said. She sat in the second chair and took a breath. They're moving you to outpatient next week. He looked at the window. I figured that was coming. Your shoulder assessment isn't finished. I know. There's also the question of Cato. She said it carefully. Something moved in his expression. Not surprise. More like a door he'd been leaning against had just shifted slightly on its hinges. They told me he'd been reassigned, Soren said, 3 months ago. Before I was transferred here, he paused. They said the repairing was already done. Alara looked at Cato. Cato was looking at Soren. He's here every night, she said. Yeah, Soren said. He is. She didn't push. She let the silence sit between them. I don't know how he keeps getting in, Soren finally said. His voice was even, almost matter-of-fact, the way people speak when they've stopped being surprised by something and started being careful with it instead. Alara nodded once. She looked down at the watch on her wrist. The second hand moved without stopping. I'm going to pull the transfer paperwork myself, she said. He looked at her then. 3 people already tried. I know, she said. I was 2 of them. She stood and smoothed her scrubs and went back to the corridor. Cato watched her go. She didn't look back. It took her 4 hours to find what she was looking for, and she did it in pieces, the way you disassemble something complicated to understand how it was built. The main administrative database returned the same null result it had returned before. She tried the secondary archive, which was supposed to contain historical service records for patients transferred from military facilities. It loaded slowly, in segments, which told her it hadn't been accessed recently. The record for WIC S existed. It had 4 attached files. 3 of them were standard. The 4th had a different header than the rest. She opened it. She read the first page slowly, then the second. She went back to the first page and read it again. Then she sat without moving for a long moment, her hands flat on the desk, the screen illuminating her face in the dark of the station. Priya came in from a patient check and stopped. "What is it?" Alara turned the screen slightly so Priya could read the top line. Priya read it, looked at Alara. "That's a commendation record." "Yes," Alara said. "That's not just a commendation record." "No," Alara said. "It isn't." She printed the document, folded it carefully, and put it in her pocket. Then she picked up the phone and dialed a number she'd found in the 4th attached file. A liaison contact listed for a unit designation she had also written down. It rang 4 times. A man answered. She told him her name, her position, and the patient's name. There was a pause. "How did you access that record?" the man asked. "It was in the archive," she said. "It wasn't sealed." Another pause, longer. "No," he said finally. "It shouldn't have been. Can I ask what you intend to do with it?" "I intend to make sure the right people see it," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Do you have the handler designation?" "WIC S," she said. She heard the man exhale. "And the dog," he said. "Is the dog there?" "Every night," she said. The man on the phone was quiet for a very long time after that. When he spoke again, his voice was different, more careful, but also warmer. "His name is Chief Warrant Officer Damon Reyes," he said. "He certified that unit. He'll want to know." She wrote the name down. "There's something else in that file," Ilara said. "The transfer record for the dog, the one that says reassignment, completed." "Yes." "Did that transfer actually happen?" The man was quiet. "No," he said. "It did not." She closed her eyes for 1 second. She had expected this. She had been sitting with the feeling of it for the last 4 hours. But hearing it said plainly still landed with weight. "Someone filed a false record," she said. "I can't confirm that to you directly," the man said, "but I would ask you to preserve whatever documentation you've printed." She touched her pocket. Already done. She reached the charge nurse at 6:15 and explained, briefly, and without embellishment, what she had found. She asked for Dr. Vetch to be notified. She asked that Chief Warrant Officer Damon Reyes be contacted through the liaison number. And she asked that the end-of-week outpatient transfer for Soren Wick be placed on administrative hold pending review. The charge nurse, a careful woman named Gwen, looked at her for a moment. "That's going to make a morning." "I know," Ilara said. "You're sure?" "I'm sure about the document," Ilara said. "I'm sure about the dog being here every night. I'm sure about 3 failed records requests." She paused. "I'm sure about the patient." Gwen picked up the phone. Chief Warrant Officer Damon Reyes arrived at Cresthaven at 10 the next morning. He was a large man, close to 60, with a close-cut gray beard and the unhurried movement of someone who had spent decades deciding when speed was necessary and when it wasn't. He wore civilian clothes, a collared shirt and dark trousers, but carried himself the way uniformed people carry themselves, with a sense of where his edges were. He introduced himself to Ilara at the nurse's station and shook her hand with both of his. "You're the one who found the file," he said. "It wasn't hidden," she said. He gave her a look that suggested he disagreed on that point, but respected her answer. Dr. Vetch arrived 12 minutes later. He had been called into a meeting he was not expecting, and it showed. He came down the corridor with his clipboard already raised, which was how he signaled that a conversation was going to go in the direction he intended. He stopped when he saw Reyes. He stopped again when he saw what was on the desk, the printed document, face up, with the header visible. He didn't say anything immediately. Reyes looked at the document, then at Vetch. "You recommended this patient for early outpatient release," he said. "Not a question." The assessment indicated it was appropriate, Vetch said. Reyes's voice was flat and even. You're aware that the standard for this unit's patients requires full range of motion assessment prior to discharge recommendation. The initial imaging was sufficient to determine. Dr. Vetch. Reyes's voice didn't rise. It got quieter. I'm not here about the shoulder. Silence. The ward was never fully quiet during the day, but the space around that moment was. Priya had stopped typing. Gwen had turned from the medication cabinet. A student nurse at the far end of the corridor had gone still. Reyes set his hand on the document. This is the service record for Staff Sergeant Soren Wick and his military working dog Cato. It includes a distinguished unit commendation. It includes a field assessment record from one of the hardest operational deployments this unit ran in a 12-year period. And it includes, he said, his finger moving to the 4th page, the original pairing certification, which was never suspended, was never lawfully transferred, and was never dissolved. Vetch said nothing. The reassignment record that appears in the system, Reyes continued, was filed without unit authorization. We are investigating the source. He paused. The dog did not leave his handler. He found his way here on his own. Across a city. Priya made a small sound. Gwen put her hand on the counter. Reyes looked at them both. Then he looked at Alara. Is the patient in his room? Yes, she said. I'd like to speak with him. He picked up the document. With you present, if you're willing. She nodded once. They walked down the corridor together. Cato was already at the door. The dog saw Reyes from 6 feet away. He didn't bark. He didn't move dramatically. He simply straightened, every line of his body going from rest to attention, and his tail swept once, low and certain. Reyes went still. He looked at the dog for a long moment. Then, quietly, he said, "Hello, old man." Cato pressed forward and put his head against Reyes's leg. Alara stood in the doorway. She did not look at Vetch. She looked at Soren, who had risen from his chair and was standing in the amber morning light from the window, his injured arm held carefully at his side. "Chief," Soren said. "Sir," Reyes said. Then he caught himself. Old habits. His voice was low. "Sit down. We need to talk." He turned to look at Alara. "You found all of it," Reyes said. She didn't say anything. "She found the field certification," Reyes said, to Soren now. "The commendation, the pairing record." He held up the paper. 17 pages. Nobody here had read them. Soren looked at Alara. "I just do my job," she said. "You did considerably more than that," Reyes said. A long moment passed. Gwen had followed them. So had Priya. The student nurse from the far end of the corridor had drifted closer, without appearing to decide to. They were all standing in the doorway now, or just outside it, pressed against the wall of the corridor in the mid-morning light. Reyes set the document on the bed. "Soren," he said, "tell them." Soren was quiet. "They should know," Reyes said. "Not an order, a request." Soren lowered himself back into the chair. Cato came and pressed against his knee. He looked at the dog for a moment, and then he looked at the small gathered crowd of nurses and said, simply, "We were partners for 6 years." He said it the way you state something that is both ordinary and enormous. He wasn't a pet. He wasn't equipment. He was my partner. He paused. On the last deployment, there was an incident. I'm not going to describe it in detail, but Cato got me back to a position where I could be retrieved. He found help. He did it twice. The second time, he was the only reason anyone knew where I was. He stopped. They gave him a commendation too, which I thought was appropriate. Reyes looked at the room. His voice was steady. Cato was the first dog in this unit to receive a commendation for dual action field assistance. First time in 11 years. He paused. And when this man was transferred for rehabilitation, someone decided the dog was surplus. He let that word sit. They filed a reassignment record, but they forgot one thing. Pairing bonds in this program are not administrative. They're behavioral. You can file whatever you like. The dog will go where the handler is. Priya wiped her face with the back of her hand. The student nurse looked at the floor. Gwen said, very quietly, across the city. Across the city, Reyes said. Soren looked at Cato. Cato looked back. Silence. Then Reyes turned to Dr. Vetch, who was standing near the door. Vetch had not spoken in 4 minutes. The outpatient recommendation will be withdrawn, Reyes said. The full assessment will be completed. The pairing record will be restored in the active system. He folded the document once. I'd appreciate your cooperation. Dr. Vetch looked at the document. He looked at Cato. He looked at Soren. Of course, he said, quietly, without the clipboard. It was not an apology, but it was the end of the argument. Priya started clapping. She did it quietly, then couldn't help it, and it grew from her alone to Gwen and the student nurse and 2 other staff members who had appeared in the doorway without anyone noticing. It was not a loud sound. It was the sound of people who had needed a reason to feel something good. Cato looked at the room. Then he sat down on Soren's foot. 6 weeks later, Soren's shoulder assessment was complete. His discharge was scheduled for a Thursday, in the afternoon. Alara was not on shift that day, but she came in anyway. Priya had saved her the seat at the end of the nurses' station with the best view of the corridor. She sat down and accepted the coffee Priya handed her without comment. Soren came out of room 12 at 2:15. He was wearing his own clothes again and carrying a small bag. Cato walked at his left heel, precise and quiet, and entirely unimpressed by the occasion. The corridor was lined, not with a crowd, just with the people who happened to be on shift, and a few who happened to have come in on their day off. Gwen stood nearest the door. The student nurse, whose name was Petra, was at the far end. Soren stopped when he saw them. He didn't say anything immediately. Then Gwen handed him a small card, the kind you get at a hardware store for engraving. He read it. His jaw worked once. He turned it over. He looked at Alara. You wrote this? He asked. Gwen wrote it, Alara said. I just told her what to put. He looked at the card again. On one side it read, Cato, Cresthaven, still here. On the other side, in Gwen's careful printing, some things can't be reassigned. He tucked it in his front pocket. Cato looked up at him once. They walked to the door. 3 months after that, a brass plate appeared on the wall beside the entrance to Ward 6. Nobody knew exactly who had arranged it. The plate was small and unobtrusive, and it read, This ward recognizes those who serve, and those who serve beside them. Petra, by then 6 months into the job, pointed it out to a new student nurse one morning, before the shift change, in the early gray light coming in through the windows at the end of the corridor. Why is there a dog on the emblem? The student nurse asked. She was 18, first week, still reading everything she passed. Petra smiled. Because he walked across a city, she said, for his person, and nobody could figure out how he kept getting in. The student nurse looked at the plate. What happened to them? They went home, Petra said. Together. The light shifted. The corridor filled with the start of the morning. Somewhere down the hall, a breakfast tray clinked. A door opened. The ward woke up, the way it woke up every day, full of people doing steady and unglamorous work for other people who needed it. And on the wall, the small brass plate caught the morning light and held it. Because some things don't get filed away. Some things find their way back, no matter what the paperwork says. And the people who notice that, who pull the record, who make the call at 6 in the morning because something isn't right, those people don't always get a ceremony. But sometimes they get a corridor full of colleagues and a card with a dog's name on it. That's enough. That's more than enough. There's a story behind every quiet person doing a hard job in a place where no one's watching. That's why we're here. If something in Alara's story stayed with you, we'd love to hear it. And we'd love for you to stay, because we have more of them. Subscribe to Nora's Story Haven, and tell us in the comments, has anyone ever gone out of their way to make sure you weren't forgotten? We'll be there, reading every word,